webinar from Nostra. My name is Gary Byrne. I'm Managed Services Director here at Nostra. As always, thanks to everybody for joining us again today. And we always start by saying for anybody who couldn't make any of the previous webinars in this series, they are available on Nostra's YouTube channel, and we will share links in a follow-up email as always after today's session. So last time we started to dive into the area of compliance and specifically into the various frameworks that are out there. So we've the NIST framework, there's NIS 2, and there's also Digital Operational Resilience Act, known commonly as DORA, which a lot of people on this call will need to adhere to either right now or very soon in the future. So today's session, we're going to jump into key component of frameworks and also cybersecurity 101. And that's asset management, the area of asset management. The starting point of protecting your IT environment really is knowing what you have to begin with. As always, we say that these sessions are best when interactive. So please, any questions, as always, post them in the chat and we will handle them for you. And at the end of today's session, we will have the panel here to deal specifically with Q&A. We will, as always, be recording the session and we will send on the recordings and slides to attendees afterwards. So with that, I'd like to welcome you all again, and I would like to hand over to our Head of Compliance, Jason Burns, who's going to take us through today's webinar.
Hello, everybody, and thank you all very much for joining us here today. What I'll do first is just invite Gary Melvin, who's joining us on the panel, to have a couple of words to begin with. Gary is our CTO. Gary, over to yourself.
Perfect. I might get you to move on the slides, Jason, as we go down through it. So again, welcome everyone. Today we're covering asset management. Asset management is a really important component of everything we do. So it's all around managing our IT assets, and that's around not just our hardware assets, but also our data repositories. So, and then making sure everything that's critical is captured under that asset management policy and process. So today we're going to step you through that. Some of the things that we kind of been covering throughout the series of webinars, and as the guy said, if you've missed any, they're recorded. We're trying to get everybody to do the basics well. So if we look after the basics well, then that gives us time to work on other stuff. These basics are secure remote access, protecting people working from home and protecting people in the office through cloud firewalls and the firewalls. Nostra Cloud Shield, you're going to hear more about that in the month of June. This is over 100 security controls around protection of your data sitting in the Microsoft Cloud, and a move towards a zero trust setup around our endpoints. So we're going to do a little bit more about that over the next couple of weeks. One fundamental control that we want everybody to have is immutable backup. So while we strive to make sure bad things don't happen, in the event that bad things do happen, we want to know that your data is safe and secure. Nostra has been trying to educate and advise people around immutability in backups. A couple of years ago, backups would have been just have a backup on site, have a backup off site. Now, one of the fundamental things we're looking for is immutability, and one of our advisories is around making sure that backup is immutable, it can't be changed. So once we write the backup, it cannot be changed. So that means if somebody bad or something bad gets access to the backups, they can't delete it. So that is a big piece. The end user is now the target in terms of cyber. So while we do need to keep our systems up to date, we need to keep our firewalls, everything needs to be kept up to date as a given. But the end user is the target. So profiling on LinkedIn, different elements of trying to find out who's working in what roles. So educating the end user through security awareness training. We're doing some of that today through these webinars, but there's also structured education for end users. And then part of today, and this fits in nicely, is managing and retiring legacy systems. So there's in every organization, there's stuff that we see in terms of our end user devices. So we're coming from Windows 10 now to Windows 11 will be in place in October as Windows 10 comes out of support. But there's a lot of stuff that we don't see. So trying to keep all the legacy stuff in the background. So making sure our switching, our UPSs for power protection, our back-end equipment, our servers, all of that is kept up to date. So in terms of cyber, keeping everything up to date is really important. And asset management then is a key component of that, and it's a useful tool for both finance, for IT budgets, for compliance. It's probably one of the most useful tools in terms of IT management, risk management that we all probably need to work on. Everything we do then, I think there's another slide, Jason, is around the NIST cybersecurity framework. So the NIST cybersecurity framework helps us put a plan in place. So it's not cybersecurity and best practice according to NOSTRA. We follow the NIST cybersecurity framework. So it's around identifying what the business does and what the business has, and part of that then is protecting it. So again, a component of the NIST cybersecurity framework is asset management, and whether we look at any other of the standards in place like ISO 27001, asset management is a big component of that as well. So today we're taking the time to focus on asset management. Any questions you have, please do ask them. I'm just going to hand over to Jason now in terms of the asset management piece.
Thank you very much, Gary, and hello again to everybody. Now, the first thing that we can ask ourselves is why do we actually need asset management? We can say there's a regulation out there that we need, whatever about NIS 2 or the DORA regulation. GDPR affects all of us as a business, and part of the elements of GDPR are you must have appropriate technical and operational measures, and you must know where your data is, why you have it, and this all dovetails into asset management. So we'll go deeper into NIS 2 and DORA a little later on, but what would be the recommended practices in asset management for any business? So what do we want to do? We want to maintain an accurate real-time inventory of all our assets. What do we have? Identify vulnerable or outdated systems and data repositories before they become a liability. So going back to our life cycle, it allows us, A, to protect ourselves, but B, also facilitates our budgeting, our planning ahead. When will that laptop that Mary is using go end of life, and we should really be getting a new laptop to make her more effective? Or our servers are now going end of life because they're running an older version of the operating system. We should plan a year or two ahead. It assigns ownership and responsibility for assets as well. So when you look at an asset doesn't have to be a physical device. An asset can also be your data. So who has responsibility for the data in your system? Finance responsible for the finance data, design responsible for the items you produce for customers, and so on. When you have your asset list, if there's an incident, you can refer to your asset list and say, right, do we have more of that asset somewhere that we need to protect? Do we have more of those assets that we can use that might be in storage perhaps or similar? Or we have all the relevant details we need in order to recover from that event. You maintain your asset register. This then comes down to our regulations, and it assigns with the key regulatory and industry standards. So NIST from the US originally, but used globally as a standard for how you manage and govern and maintain and protect your systems. And then the actual regulations which say you must do this. So NIST is something that will facilitate you in doing that. You use your entries in your asset management for your risk management process. So as you enter in your details into your asset register and however you manage that, you also assign what level of risk do we see against that object. It allows you to see, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I need to consider that, or I need to protect it. Or actually, do you know what? I shouldn't have it at all. And then, as I was describing earlier, it assists your teams in your budgeting and your planning. Now, moving on to, right, well, okay, we've identified all of that as a good thing. What do we do next? Well, okay, first things first. Who has ownership of this process? Who makes sure this process happens? Who maintains the process? And then ultimately, what do we use it for afterwards? We have an asset management policy. This clearly defines how and why we do this, so that we have an understanding of the business requirements for this or the imperatives needed. The actual asset register itself, this gives us the visibility we're looking for. Using that, as I mentioned before, you integrate that with your risk management. Okay, is this an acceptable risk? Okay, we don't need to do anything. And actually, we're not that happy about that. Let's put in additional controls around this and protect it. MFA is a very simple one that came in maybe 5-10 years ago. It was coming in 5 years ago. It was de rigueur, and now we've moved on to newer levels of it. So the risks change as well. And then you move on to, well, actually, we don't want this risk at all, so let's remove it. Now, once you have your asset register in place and you're doing your risk management, well, you want to monitor it. It doesn't remain static. So going back to the ownership and responsibility, you look to make sure that it is kept as a live document or a live store or live information such that it's still practical and of use to the business. Now, what constitutes an asset? So you look to your business in an identification process and you see, what do I actually have in there? A discovery process. And look, there's 3 simple elements here. You have your physical assets, you have your software assets, and then you have your data assets. Now, depending on how critical a person is to your system, you can also consider a person to be a critical asset to the business as well. But that can be very specific. Fundamentals of the asset register is, have we something on a desk somewhere or in a cupboard or in a server room we need to protect? Are we using particular bits of software, and are we appropriately licensed? And what would happen if that license ran out? What would that do to us? And data, what would happen if we lost the data or if we didn't have access to the data? So we identify and we categorize all those data. So we've gone in and we've looked to see, right, we know we have these items. We do our risk assessment on it, and we look to put in a strategy to mitigate those risks. And we categorize them into, where do these fit in our organization? And do we need this in a particular area? Does it feature higher on the risk level or not? We'll come back to that at a later stage. So going to the previous presentation where we were talking about the regulations, as I say, GDPR applies to everybody. DORA and the NIS2 directive, Network Information Security Directive, that they focus on different areas of the economy. So DORA, specifically designed around the financial sector, focusing heavily on resilience. Can I recover? And supply chain management. Is my supply chain secure? And the NIS2, originally that came out for operators of essential services. Think in terms of the water board, thinks in terms of power stations and so on. And now the regulatory authorities have expanded that to other elements of the economy. So if you're above a certain level of turnover and in certain areas of the economy, that will now apply to you. And in a similar vein, the NIS2, that will apply stricter controls around your notifications, incident management, and supply chain. So there's a lot of overlap between these. So in DORA, we have our financial entities that we want to protect. We have risk management in the regulation, and both ISO 27001, DORA, and also the NIS2, they're all very heavily weighted towards risk management. You identify what you have, and then you say what risk is associated. DORA brings in the incident reporting. So, hey, I have something happening here. I need to let my peers know and understand this. This was in the NIS original directive. And then we have our operational resilience testing. So DORA brings in more requirements around ensuring that your critical systems are tested each year for their resilience. So your asset management is used as part of that to define your critical systems. Onto the NIS2, as I said, it's now expanded to a wider area. The risk management focus is inherent as well. incident reporting is inherent in it as well. And this was really to improve the culture of security across a wider sphere of the economy, not just focusing on certain areas. So this now brings it into the wider economy. Now, what framework or tools can we use to help us adhere to these regulations? So one of the frameworks that are out there, and one which we lean heavily towards, and also as recommended by the National Cybersecurity Centre in Ireland, is the NIST framework. Now, you can see here that it operates at several simple levels. At its core now, it's got govern, so the management of the system. You start off at identify, and then you look to protect what you've identified. Then you want to ensure you can detect if items are happening. You want to be able to respond to it if you've detected an element, and then you want to be able to recover from it. And then this is a continuous process, so the circle is used to help illustrate that. On the left-hand side there, you can see where the controls are and the subcategories of it. So we can see under identify, we are talking about asset management, risk assessment, and improvement. Now, NIST is a living framework. So what do I mean by that? The original NIS framework did not have govern as a separate entity. With the NIS 2 directive, govern became a separate item, and the elements of govern that were in the rest of the categories, they were pulled out, and it was made a more important feature of the system. We have our supply chain risk management. Currently, anything from 30 to 60% of our compromises in systems can be traced back through the supply chain, whether it's an email coming from a supplier that they were compromised, or whether it's a supplier has supplied a particular piece of software which was compromised in its own right. They're just two simple examples of how we have to be careful about our supply chain management. And then they became a stronger focus on privacy and civil liberties. So the world is a much more challenging place at the moment, and so we need to protect it.
Jason, sorry, just to jump in there, I think it's a valid point. You know, in what we've seen over the last kind of year or so in terms of AI, it is the supply chain that they're targeting. You know what I mean? We've seen hardware vulnerabilities in the market. We've seen a number of software vulnerabilities in the market. So it is being seen as a viable kind of attack vector. And that's why, as you say, the implementation of the frameworks to manage supply management is a huge and critical area.
Correct. If you consider there was a vulnerability in a supplier's piece of software that was in Microsoft and NASA and many US government organizations. If it can happen to them, it can happen to you. So we do need to be very careful, and we need to do appropriate due diligence on who our suppliers are.
Yeah, thank you.
So what is the applicability to asset management in the NIST framework? So, and I do apologize where NIST and the NIS regulation are very close by, so do bear with me and with us on that front. So you can see that its intention is to help you understand the asset inventory that you have. So as you work your way through the controls, it will prompt you to challenge yourself on where is it, what is it, why is it, how do I protect it? So this comes back down to our risk assessment. So it looks to see, can we protect all those assets then against the potential threats and vulnerabilities? So how do they do that? So we look here in the NIST cybersecurity framework, CSF, category on the left-hand side. You can see here we're focusing on identify. They give them numbers, but here we go. Here's the description. First one is physical devices and systems are inventoried. So how does that relate to DORA as an example? The ICT asset inventory. What is the purpose? Maintain a complete inventory of the hardware and the software, so we know what we have. The next element is the software. So as I was explaining earlier, we have our physical, we have our software. Maintain the inventory of that as well. organizational communication and data flows are mapped. That's a long-winded one. So in other words, we understand the dependency and any third-party risks are out there. So we'd sit and we look and we say, here, an example I often give to people is, what could stop the truck leaving the plant? And trace back along that and say, okay, well, these elements here could all affect that. So you look at your critical path, you look at your business impact assessment. External information systems are cataloged. Once again, this comes back to understanding your dependencies and your third-party risks. And then finally, resources are prioritized based on classification. So once again, what could stop the truck leaving? What could stop a kettle boiling in a house? What could stop a car from being able to be driven to work? What are those elements? So how do what does that give us? We get an effective resource management, we get our continuous risk assessment, and we get our regulatory compliance. So here we go. We have our better management, allocation, and lifecycle planning. We understand the vulnerabilities on an ongoing basis, and we have our compliance. So if we have an incident, when the knock comes on the door because you have reported that you have this incident, it is a legal requirement. You can show that, yes, we had best practices. And in a lot of those cases, using the example of the GDPR, the Data Protection Commissioner will say, okay, thank you very much. You had appropriate technical measures in place. The data is being protected. You had a minor issue. Thank you very much for reporting it. If you haven't been managing it and you can't explain where things are, then things will get a little bit more complicated. So how do you align the NIST asset management practices with DORA? Well, we want to use the robust risk management in it. We want to use the regular testing, and we want to support operational resilience. So what do they look like? Well, the risk management practice is essential to meet the compliance. What does regular testing look like? Under DORA, you must test your recovery at least annually. Operational resilience, so ensuring your asset management processes are aligned with the operational resilience is critical for DORA as well. So what do I mean? What do I mean by that? Well, when it comes around to there being an issue, could we identify everything at that point in time? So now, how does the framework align with asset management for the Network Information Security 2 Directive, NIS 2? Once again, we have our incident response. So once we have our assets in place, we've done our business impact assessment, we've identified our critical processes, we can now create our incident management. If we haven't done those steps beforehand, we can't do that incident response. The risk assessments, we use that to actually formulate those incident responses. And then as we were doing the risk assessment, we identified issues that we felt we needed to address. So as we address those, we have put in place additional security measures. So whether it's a simple security measure, like our payroll person works remotely, they print out items for whatever reason, you supply them with a shredder to deal with that. That's a very simple old school response to an issue. On the other side, you're implementing a new system, and does it have appropriate two-factor authentication or passphrase security on it? If it doesn't, well, then we look to see, is there a different system that will do that for us, or can we enable it on that system? Now, we ensure the compliance and the resilience with our proactive asset management. So our regular checking on our asset management, is it up to date? If an asset is moving, do we track that movement? Has somebody got 2 or 3 laptops? Is there a server that's retired and it should no longer be on the assets and it should have the data destroyed, helping us to adhere to GDPR? Continuous monitoring. So can we put in place security on our system that will give us a live view on what the asset is doing at the moment. So remote management and monitoring. Is it giving us the ages of the devices, the warranty on the devices? Have we got an issue that we need to address, that if there's problems, we need spares associated with it? All of these helping to give us a resilience that if there's a failure on an item, we have our spares associated with them. Regular assessments. Now, one of the core elements of the NIST framework is that you have external observation of your system or external audits of your system, so that you get a second pair of eyes or a third pair of eyes, or penetration testing. Are my policies up to date? Is my system appropriate for what we're doing at the moment? So threats evolve, and any IT system that doesn't evolve with them is more at risk than a system that does evolve with them. Now, on to something for today now. How is it that we can use all of those elements that are around asset management as a useful item for our business? So something I've been talking about from time to time here is the business impact assessment. So when you are getting your insurance form, quite often it will ask you, do you have an appropriate disaster recovery procedure in place? And then when the event comes where you do need to make a claim on your insurance, that if you can demonstrate that you have this, then your insurance cover is much more likely to help cover you. That's a very simple, practical, real world item that we can all use in our businesses. Now, what I tend to find with companies is that when you go and do your business impact assessment, it often will show up elements of your business that perhaps you weren't aware of. But it's not a simple, it's not a one-step affair we do. This will be something that will have a life cycle in its own right. There'll be your initial discovery, there'll be a first iteration of it, and then at the end, you'll find it'll reach maturity on that front. So we'll move on now to the first steps associated with that. So key objectives of a business impact assessment. So the business impact assessment helps organizations under the potential impact of disruptions on operations, resources, and thus it helps enable better preparedness. It allows you to prioritize the recovery of systems. So it identifies critical functions that need immediate attention when there's a disruption. And then we go down to what are the effective recovery strategies. So now that we've prioritized the item, we look to see what is it that will get us back up and running as quickly as possible. What are our recovery time objectives or our recovery point objectives? So in other words, how much data can we afford to lose and how long can we be down? So what we do as a first step for our business impact assessment is we develop the asset management program. So we utilize the NIST framework for that. So we look at it to oversee the assets from acquisition, use, disposal, and this allows us to give us efficiencies and accountability throughout the life cycle of it. When you buy your laptops or your PCs, there is a logical life cycle to it where for the first couple of years, it will be something that'll be very useful and highly efficient. It will reach a point where it's now running a little bit slower, so maybe it's not so suitable for frontline. And then when it reaches the end of its life cycle, there'll be an element of we now need to protect the data that was on it, and we need to dispose of it appropriately as well. Part of your asset management program will be your policies and procedures. What happens when the devices come into the organization, and how do we manage them on an ongoing basis? So when we are looking at our databases, are they too big? Is there a performance issue that we need to address here? Is there a data retention issue we need to address here? So using one element of it where data retention has, we have too much data in there. It's led to a performance issue. We adhere to the GDPR or similar, where we only keep the data for as long as we need. Now we've actually improved our performance and protected ourselves against the data regulator, or protected ourselves relative to the regulations. Also around the asset management, we put in the roles and responsibilities to ensure that management may maintain it at a governance level. We look to ensure that we have someone who's managing it on a practical level, that the information is in there, and that in the event of an incident, that we have identified who is required in order to get our information back into the system and working. So identifying our critical assets. So we go through and we make sure that we have our hardware, our data, our resources, and our systems. We prioritize those items. And then once we have prioritized them within the system, what is the impact of those being unavailable? And how quickly can we get them back? So looking at the prioritization of them as based on their impact, we want to ensure that at no point in our recovery period that we are left in a position that means that we are disappointing either our customers or the services that we supply. So the example I give on the operators of essential services is, if you have the water supply that can't be supplied, or you have the electricity that can't be supplied, that's two features that stop the normal functioning of the economy out there. On a very simple level, you come into your weighbridge on a plant. If the weighbridge isn't functioning, well, then you can't have your trucks leaving the plant. So you need to ensure that those bottlenecks in the system, or those critical elements in the system, have been prioritized. Now you assess the vulnerabilities around them. So using our example there of the weighbridge, is it running an older version of the software system? Is it buggy? Can we bring it up to date? Assessing the vulnerabilities, what are their potential weaknesses? Have we kept our network up to date, or is there a potential that a piece of malware could get in and affect the systems? We evaluate the risks then, and we decide, what level is this risk? Is it a high? Is it a medium? Is it a low? And we decide, if it's a high, we need to address it quickly. If it's a medium, we're prepared to tolerate for a while. If it's a low risk, maybe we don't need to remediate it in any shape or form. So now that we've done our business impact assessment, we can now use that as to create our disaster recovery. So our disaster recovery plan will detail who is required. So we look back at our ownership of the asset. It'll look at the suppliers involved. So we will have identified critical responses in there. It will identify who is required for this. So that's the resource allocation, or it will identify the hardware required to recover it. And then within that disaster recovery plan, we will have the risk likelihood in there as well, which allows us to decide what level of resources we need to apply to that in advance of there being an issue. So if the likelihood is very high, you prioritize your protection on that. If the likelihood is very low, you may address that at a later stage. So what are the best practices in maintaining your effective asset register? So it's regular updates, thorough documentation, and stakeholder engagement. So your regular updates will ensure that you have the current view of it. Your thorough documentation will mean that when an event occurs, you have all the information necessary. When you have stakeholder engagement, you will get buy-in and you will get resources allocated to it. Also, when the stakeholders are engaged, you will have a much wider view into the system, and you'll have a better understanding of what might be necessary in there. So the continuous monitoring and improvement on it, you also need to look at your own processes. If you put in your own process to begin with, there's nothing to say that that can't be improved or should be improved or maybe even changed completely in it. So you need to have your regular reviews. So at least annually, all your policies and procedures should be reviewed and maintained and checked to see if they still fit for purpose. And you need to look at the emerging risks and what risks have now come out into the system that weren't there before. Or perhaps there is new systems that will actually make you more effective. So it's both protection.
And Jason, just on that, thanks very much. So we do have a question in there. So how easy is it to maintain an up-to-date asset register? And also who in an organization should do this?
Okay, so to maintain an asset register, you need to put in place the procedures and management around new assets. So when there's a requirement for a new asset, is there appropriate due diligence done on the new asset? Now, when you're talking about buying some PCs, that's a relatively simple process. But associated with getting your new PC and putting it in place, you should have a new setup checklist or something similar. And as part of that checklist, you will have that, is this now entered into the asset register appropriately? In a similar vein, let's go to a larger scale, and let's say you're putting in a project, rolling out a new ERP system or something similar. So as an element of that, you should have in your policies and procedures that all the appropriate resources that are required for it are considered. Are they an asset or are they a process? And if it's an asset, is it entered into the asset register itself? And similarly, when something is disposed of, that there's an appropriate policy or procedure around which challenges you to make sure you have kept that up to date. Now that's the day-to-day operation. What you must then also do is you should do an audit at least annually to actually we'll call it walk around the building. Now, you can walk around the building to physical objects or the sites, but you should also do a virtual walk around and interrogate the systems and see, hey, actually, there's this piece of software running here that's running in finance that no one actually reported appropriately. We didn't know about it, and we now need to look at it. So I would say it's two elements of it. One is appropriate policies and procedures around what you do, and the second one is auditing of the system or monitoring of the system, if you can put in the system around it. So that was the first section. What was the second question associated with that?
It was, and who in the organization should manage that? Who should do that?
Okay. Now, depending on the size of the organization, it tends to come in under, we'll say, managing director or financial responsibility for the assets. Responsibility for the business or responsibility for the asset. Once you take a step down below that level, it's really something that should be in the ethos of the company, if it's large enough, that the asset register should be maintained with the team that looks after it. Now, that will be someone like an IT manager or a system administrator or an IT responsible. And I would say it should be a KPI within any system that have we reviewed it within certain periods of time within the business. So I often say there's 3 E's involved here. There's education, right? We need to do this. There's engagement. Okay, I accept I need to do that. But there's also enforcement, which is where the KPI comes in to say, okay, somebody else within the business is checking that it's actually being done.
And can I ask you then on that? So when you say asset register, are we talking about a Microsoft Excel asset register, or is there something that might work better?
There are 2 elements to this. Look, a lot of us started off in small businesses, and I wouldn't be saying we need to go off and buy a huge piece of software in order to maintain this. Yes, I'm going to give an example shortly, and it will be an Excel spreadsheet. If you're of a certain size, that will actually work for you. Once you go above another size, something along the lines of a database that both takes in automated information or manually entered information into it would obviously be something that could be streamlined or become more effective for you, because it's very easy for copy and paste to ruin a good Excel spreadsheet, as we've all found over time. So I think it is very much a case of tailor it for the organization. And once it reaches a point where it becomes unwieldy, ideally you do it beforehand, but recognize when it's become unwieldy, and then we look for the software solution or the database management.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think in some cases I've actually seen like even Microsoft SharePoint be used, you know what I mean, for kind of housing and using as asset register. So it'd be worth
Correct.
reaching out to your modern workplace team, you know, either in Nostra or whoever is your MSP. Jason, thank you very much for that.
All right. So now, so here's so the core elements of the asset management that we discussed earlier. We'll say we have the governance in place. Someone said, here, Jason, go out there and make sure we maintain our asset register. And we should really have a policy around that. So what will a policy look like? So a policy will say, here's the purpose for this policy. And for those of us of a certain vintage, I hope you understand my reference to Acme Anvil's assets. If not, I feel very old. So we check to see our Acme Anvil's assets in alignment with the NIST cybersecurity framework. We aim that all the assets are properly identified, classified, tracked, and protected during their life cycle. So all those slides, there you go. There's one sentence. That's what we need to look at. So what's the scope? So it applies to all physical and digital assets owned or leased or managed. So it doesn't have to be something that's in the office at the moment by Acme Anvil. It includes hardware, software, data, cloud resources. Your cloud system is an asset just the same as anything else, and anything that's deemed critical to the Acme Anvil's operations. Who are the roles and responsibilities? Well, the asset owners are responsible for the overall management and protection of the assigned assets. So let's say your ERP system is put in place. The financial department, someone in there will be responsible for that system. So it should be a check and balance situation where not only are the IT department doing it, but that the asset owner will challenge them to say, is this all in place? Are we protected? Do we have what we need to do? Custodians, so responsible for the day-to-day handling and maintenance of the system. So in other words, your users of using the ERP system, the users of the system, are they maintaining the data correctly? Are they practicing data hygiene? In other words, are we getting rid of data when we don't need it? The IT department. So the IT department come in like knights on their horses, or creeping in under the cover of darkness like ninjas, depending on what way it needs to be operated. And they're responsible. They're the oil in the system, and we've all been there. Those of us in the IT game, where we've been out there on a wet Friday evening, or there on a nice day when we should be at home sitting in the garden. And they make sure that whatever has been defined for that system should be actually happening. And now in the modern world, the compliance officer, that person is there to make sure, or that team are there to make sure that we are adhering to the regulations. You know, has somebody brought in software that they shouldn't have installed? Is somebody storing more data about personal individuals than they should be? So the next part of the policy defines what will be in the inventory. So what's in there? We'll maintain an inventory of all assets. The inventory shall include what? It'll include the asset type, the ownership, the location, the classification, and the status. They're very simple items. They're 101. You can put an awful lot more into it, but if you had that, that's a very good start. Moving on to the second page, the asset classification. You know, is there sensitive information in there? Is there critical information in there? Is there high value information in there? So confidential, internal, public. What does this data actually look like, or this asset look like? I once worked for a company, and they didn't actually mention the name of one section of their building, because that was the part of their process that was so secret that they didn't want people on a plant tour even knowing about it. So I won't name it now for fear that it's still classified, but if Acme Anvil are still doing it, it was a very good process.
And Jason, to what level, do you think of, classification of an asset? I've always thought something that would be able to retain information and so has a brain, like a CPU and a PC. You've got keyboards, even to the antenna on the roof, that controls the broadband is the asset as well. So, you should be really working with Nostra or working with your MSP to be able to actually, to define the original list of assets and make sure that you're getting everything in.
That's correct. When you sit down and you do a physical review, you quite often start at the front door.
Yeah.
So how many front doors do you have? Do you have 3 or 4 ISPs because you're super critical? Do you have only one, which makes it in its own right critical? What might fail on your front door? Should we have spares associated with it? So as you go onto the page a little further on, you'll see where I come to on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So the final 2 elements then in a sample policy, your life cycle management. So we're calling out in the policy that we need something in there that will allow us to manage the life cycle of the cradle to the grave. When we get it, did we do the right thing associated? As we have it, are we maintaining it? When we're disposing of it, do we dispose of it correctly? And have we now purged the system of it? And then compliance. So the world has moved on from a comment that a chap I worked with nearly 30 years ago said, if they ever bring in a regulation in the IT department, it's going to be an interesting life. He said it slightly differently, but back then there was no regulations. There was one entry in the Financial Act saying, don't hold on to data longer than you should have. And that was pretty much it. But the world has moved on from there now. And we now need to demonstrate that we are in compliance with the regulations. So moving quickly on to a sample asset register, what might be in there about an object. So do you use asset tags? Going out of favor now to some degree because of privacy or security concerns. If you leave your laptop behind, you want to advertise that it's your company that it came from. Also, most devices already have a serial number, so why double job? It's a matter of debate, shall we say. The next item, is there a unique name for it? So quite often I would describe this as the human readable name. Those of us in the IT world can sometimes get a bit lost with how we name items. So sometimes there's often a friendly name we can put in to make it easier to find. Whenever you're designing a system, in an ideal world, you will say, I need to make it so that the person that comes behind me when I win the lotto and I'm out the door with my heels clicking together the following day, that they can do it after me. So when you're developing a system, always look to reduce the opportunity for a drama afterwards. And the drama afterwards could be as simple as, I don't understand how this system was created. Keep it simple. A description, the status in use, is it retired, the serial number, what type of an asset is it? So if we look here, we can see desktop, laptop. Okay, they're standard enough. Go down to the other end and we have data repository and application. So rather than needing 2 or 3 different types of register, one register to do them all. Possibly a Lord of the Rings reference there, but I'll move on from a slightly nerdy past as well there in that respect. Physical location or geographical, or is it in a particular data center or with a particular service provider? Who is the owner of the asset? Now, it would be all glad to hear we're nearly there, but here's one of the critical items of it. Once you've done the initial view, what is the risk to it? And this ties back to all those frameworks. This goes back to 101. What do we have? What's the risk associated with it? How do I protect it? So you can see the asset register is key. It's the foundation. It's the stepping stone to all the others. Get that right. Get it simple. It allows us to see, here we go, there's a red. So at the end of all the day, what do we look for when we're looking for a report? We look for the red, the amber, or the green. The green, we're delighted. Okay, someone should check it to make sure someone hasn't used their coloring pencil wrong. But here we go. What's the impact level of this? Well, it'd be 5 if it happened. So let's say once again, we have a flood. That would be a catastrophic event there. And if we didn't have it, if we didn't have an object because of that flood, there we go. It's exactly the same. It's catastrophic. So this could be as simple as the server that runs your ERP system, because you still have an on-prem, maybe it's sitting on the floor and you could have a flood. And I've been in a situation where a server sitting on a floor on the first floor was subject to a flood because of a thunderstorm overloaded the gutters, and all the water poured down the inside of the building. So when you're looking at your assets, what's the impact level if I don't have it? And look to see what are the things that could impact it.
And this is a critical area, you know, for anybody who's been involved in, you know, customers on the line, central bank inspections and prism inspections and so on and so forth. You know, this is the stuff they're looking at, you know, that you've considered the risk around every single asset you have, and also the codependencies. You know, if you have a piece of software sitting on a piece of hardware and something were to happen to the piece of hardware, what would the event be in relation to the software? So this is a critical area of the asset register to identify the risk and identify the codependencies of how one thing is linked to another. We mentioned earlier about the broadband antenna on the roof. Might seem fairly, you know, crude and fairly simple, but if it goes down, what's the knock-on effect to the other assets in the organization thereafter, you know?
That's correct. And at a very simple level, you can have a matrix which shows here's your hardware, here's your software or your data, and you say, what is this reliant upon? And as you trace back along through it, you say, well, actually, that's reliant on that one switch which is sitting in a cupboard, or it's reliant actually on that one person who we haven't cross-trained in any shape or form. So yes, that looking for dependencies within a system comes out of knowing your system.
And that's, for me, one of the great things about, you know, DORA and acts like that, is because it actually makes us look, like I said earlier, at the supplier chain. It makes us look at every piece of the puzzle to see, you know, how is this being managed? What's the risk against same? And to make sure that we know every single piece of the formula.
That's correct. That's correct. So final thoughts, and we've hit the time marker reasonably well there. So integrating your asset management with the framework enhances your overall resilience and compliance, because it helps you identify all those items that you were just discussing, Gary, all our dependencies, all our likelihoods, all our risks, and it helps us to mitigate against that. Gives us the enhanced resilience because we can manage the risk effectively, because A, we know about the risk, and B, we know all the items relating to it. The compliance assurance, if we use the framework, it means we stand a very good chance that if we get a knock on the front door, we can say, here's our self-assessment, here's our annual review, and yes, we had an issue, but we had done everything we could do in order to protect ourselves against it. And then the final element is this framework hasn't been developed by a lawyer sitting in an office somewhere around regulation. This has been developed by people out there working at the front line and saying what would actually be effective for us. So the framework is developed by people who want to help us, and the regulations are developed by people who want to protect us. So it's putting an effective front end onto the regulation. So I think I'm at my final slide there, which is any further questions or any further debate amongst ourselves on that front. So I'd like to firstly thank everyone for bearing with me on that. As I tried to bring in Acme Anvils as soon as I could, so hopefully it was of some use to everybody.
Jason, that's fantastic. If anybody does have any questions, please, the Q&A option is there. Just throw in your question and we'll deal with it. Jason, I might ask you, you know, what should a customer do next? You know, what should a Nostra customer do next? You know what I mean? To start this process and to start looking at building an asset register, reaching out to ourselves. How can we support them on that journey?
Well, we can support them in a number of different ways. So obviously the compliance team, of which I'm a member of, this is something we specialize in terms of utilizing the frameworks and helping the customers around this. We have a number of essential services that use our services to manage that. So we will help you develop your policies. We will help you develop your procedures. We will help you with putting in place the functionality to support those. Within our own systems, we obviously use as part of our managed services elements that will help populate the asset register. It won't do everything because some assets are not physical or can't have the software running on it, but it will allow us to assist you in doing all of that.
I think that's
Sorry,
a very important. I think that's an important point, just in terms of it's taken the asset register from just being a list of hardware to the data repository. So it does require work to keep it up to date. So I think our focus is changing to making sure all the data repositories, anywhere your data sits or passes through, ideally should be in the asset register. So that antenna your data is passing through, printers, your network switches, like UPS is a really critical piece. So everything that is critical to the organization or anywhere where data sits or passes through should be in the asset register. And I think it's probably one of the most overlooked IT tools that is out there to assist businesses in terms of risk management and in terms of budgeting. There's quite a lot of benefits to having an up-to-date asset register.
Gar, thanks a million for that. And actually, listen, a few questions in there. I'll just deal with them as they're topical. So, question from Raj: do we also add in the desktop screens, keyboards, and mice in the register? So, I guess this goes back to what we said earlier about CPUs and then peripherals.
For me, I wouldn't. I'll get Jason's and Reg's opinion. For me, I try and keep it to. It's a risk-based piece. I know the financial people in the house will like to have a asset register from a financial point of view, but we look at this from an information security and risk point of view. So if it's a device that is €100 or below, or if it's a device that doesn't have the data on it, we typically and me in particular don't recommend adding it to the asset register. So, but Jason and Reg, I'd be keen to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, so in terms of managing assets, I wouldn't be managing screens and peripheral devices, as Gary mentioned there. Anywhere that data resides for the organization or the data passes through needs to be on an asset register. If we're trying to manage screens and keyboards and other peripheral webcams, it becomes unmanageable. So look, this is one of the most important things any organization can do, is keeping an accurate and up-to-date asset register. So we'd be looking to streamline that and not to add in additional works in managing devices that really won't be risk assessed.
Correct. I agree entirely. As Gary said, the financial people will want everything from the management of the asset perspective. However, for us, it's managing the data or the risk associated with the system. So for us, no, the description I used to say was anything that has intelligence in it. So or the data resides in.
Just to jump back in on that, so this is defined within the policy. So it explicitly called out that within the policy that we do not manage these additional devices. We manage devices that have maybe a particular asset value or that data passes through. We might add in asset value to keep the finance people happy.
One of the big things then on the asset register is keeping it up to date, I think, and making sure. And this is becoming more important as we kind of move towards a zero trust setup. When a new device is added, and we're conscious that there's a lot of Windows 11 going to be coming, and there's a lot of Windows 10 devices going to be decommissioned. As new devices get added, it's really important that the old ones get dropped down to a decommissioned or destroyed state. So we're tracking the life cycle. So then they never leave the asset register. So when you come back in a year's time, you can say, well, where's those 50 devices? They were decommissioned, so they're in a holding area, or they've been destroyed. We've moved them off to secure destruction. So it's being able to track those assets through their lifetime, from going into production all the way through to destruction. And that's where an asset register becomes really a thing. I know it probably hasn't been asked, but one of the major benefits of having an asset register is when you're looking at your reports, your IT monthly reports every month, you look at your asset register and say, I have 50 laptops I have 20 desktops, 5 network switches, 6 servers, 8 access points. Are all of those up to date? And can I get a report to say I'm now fully up to date with all of those? And your asset policy then might have something in it that says that our general lifetime of asset register or assets, IT assets, is typically around 5 years. Some will be less, some will be more. It's up to the organization to define it. But if we decide it's 5 years, then we can look at the asset register and tell me, give me everything that's coming out of the age 5 years or whatever is decided next year, so I can build my budget. And typically what you will see in there is the stuff that you don't see every day. You'll see some critical network switches, you'll see some UPS devices, you'll see stuff that access points, you'll see stuff that is probably due to be changed, but you're not looking at it every day, so you don't see it. So there's some really good tangible benefits of having an up-to-date asset register.
And guys, we're at time, but a couple of very quick questions. Thank you. Okay, a question from James. Do Nostra recommend an alternative software tool instead of using Excel? So I think earlier we talked about things like I've seen SharePoint being used, databases being used. I guess reaching out to Nostra and kind of engaging with ourselves, we can probably help with that.
Yeah, there's some tools out there. They get quite expensive and they take a lot of time to manage. So these would manage data repository, software, database, all that type of stuff. So look, if we can help and consult on that side. But look, a starting point is understanding what assets you have. For me, this is probably the most critical IT security an organization can do, because it's the basis of all our risk assessments, business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, vulnerability management, and backing up. If we haven't identified assets, we're probably not backing it up, or there could be data on that that's critical to the business that we don't have copies of.
Just before we finish up, Kieran asked a question there on IP security cameras. That's probably one of the ones we see quite a bit. We see CCTV units and cameras. So yes, definitely should be in the register. Anything, because they need to be kept up to date. Same with the phones. They're on the network. They need to be kept up to date. Anything that's on your network, data passes through or is involved in a critical service, needs to be in the asset register and kept up to date.
Folks, thank you. We do have other questions there. And what I will say is that, reach out to Nostra, and, if you have a Nostra account manager, please reach out to them and have this conversation. As Jason said, we have a full compliance team here who can help you around this area. And we're waiting for your call. Or reach out, if you don't have a Nostra account manager, reach out to myself, gary.byrne@nostra.ie. And I will make sure that you're looked after personally. Jason and the team, thanks a million for everything today. I will say that the next webinar that we're looking at is going to be, so again, continuing on the compliance, we're going to look at recommended practices around cyber risk management. So we've looked at the assets. We're now looking at what are the good practices around cyber risk management. Date that we're targeting for that is June 17. You will be sent email notification the same, and as I said, we will send on the slides to everybody who is here today. So folks, thank you all again, and everybody enjoy your day.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.